Why cave diving is so dangerous. What if a great cave diving expedition ended up taking your life? You don't even know what you are doing, maybe your last thing while breathing. The same was a true incident that happened in 1973, which led 4 divers lost their life. What we are going to witness is the story of the shaft and its deadly diving disaster, so stay with us to know the real tragic happened there. The Mount Gambier cave diving tragedy occurred in a sinkhole called the Shaft near Mount Gambier, South Australia, which was filled with water. It looks like a normal farm with animals in the paddocks to people who don't know. But Trevor Ashby's farm near Mount Gambier in South Australia hides a very interesting secret. Many Australians would be shocked to learn about the strange site that's buried deep underground. It's been called the closest thing to going to space that we can get without leaving Earth. Welcome to the Shaft, a bottomless pit of water that was a popular place to dive in the late 1960s and early 1970s, but had to be closed down after 4 divers died there in 1973. A backlash from the public led to the formation of the Cave Divers Association of Australia, which wanted cave diving to be self-regulated instead of banned. The shaft, which is considered to be at least 120 meters deep, was discovered while Ashby's grandfather was plowing a paddock, and a horse plunged its hoof through the ground. The family tried to fill it by throwing lots of stones down, but it was so big that they quickly realized they had no chance. Even now, the small hole in the grass is the only way to get to the big cave below. It is the deepest, darkest sinkhole that has ever been found in the area. The disaster that happened there killed Stephen and Christine M. Millott, Gordon G. Roberts, and John H. Bockerman, all of whom were just hobbyist scuba divers. The 4 divers exceeded the boundaries they had established for themselves without consulting a map. As a result, they were disoriented, ran out of air, and perished. As of May 2015, those were the only deaths known to have occurred there. But how did they end up in such a disaster? On May 26, 1973, 9 divers went to Mount Gambier, South Australia, to go cave diving at the shaft. This is a 3 feet wide sinkhole that leads to a large underwater cavern known for its clear water and interesting interior structure. The 8 divers who planned to go into the cave were John H. Bockerman, Peter S. Burr, Christine M. Millott, Glenn Millott, Stephen Millott, Larry Reynolds, Gordon G. Roberts, and Robert J. Smith. Joan Harper, the 9th member of the group, decided not to dive, but would stay by the sinkhole and make hot soup and help the group in other ways. The day before the catastrophe, the group signed the guest book at B.V. Ashby's farmhouse and successfully dived into the sinkhole, extending a shot line about 150 feet into the water, and reached the rock pile, a central mound of limestone debris about 40 meters right below the sinkhole entrance. Before coming up to the surface, they spent a short time looking around the edge of the rock pile. The group had already set up their shooting line, so they planned to come back the next morning and keep exploring the cave. After filling their 72 cubic foot cylinders at Mount Gambier on May 28th, the group went straight down to the rock pile when they got to the sinkhole the next morning. Divers stated that they had no intention of going past the edge, which is a tiny, downward sloping section of the cave on one side of the main chamber far from the sinkhole opening that allows in natural light. Most people thought that recreational diving was safe only up to the rock pile. The caves around it were dark, had never been looked into, and were full of loose silt and broken limestone. They went to depths where nitrogen narcosis is very bad if the air you breathe doesn't have helium in it. Even at the edge of the rock pile where the divers were, narcosis would have had a big effect, which may have made it hard for them to make decisions. Even though the first descent went well, the 8 divers didn't follow a number of well-known safety rules at the beginning of the dive. The shot line didn't reach all the way to the floor of the cave, and it didn't have any extra air tanks. The divers also didn't have a good handle on their air. The group hadn't chosen specific people to dive with, and they didn't use a safety line. Glenn Millot later said that they didn't use safety lines because it would have been dangerous for the divers to have 8 separate lines in such a small space. Robert Smith had been diving at the sinkhole 8 times before and made most of the dive plan. He didn't think that the other people in the group would go as far into the cave as they did. With the help of former Chief Superintendent Wallace B. Budd, the stories of the 4 divers who made it out alive were used to make a timeline of what happened to the 4 people who died. Around the edge of the rock pile, Smith started to feel the effects of nitrogen narcosis. He was roughly 180 feet down, according to his depth gauge. Smith, an experienced diver who had felt narcosis before, told his group that he was going back to the top of the rock pile. The group made it clear that they would keep looking. Smith stayed close to the pile of rocks and walked around it for about 8 minutes, looking for animal bones. Then he saw Glenn Millot's torch coming back from where the others had gone. Glenn Millot was watching his air and knew he was running out of time. He tried to tap Christine Millot on the arm to remind her that she was also running out of time, but they have pulled apart before he could. Smith and Glenn Millot met at the same time. They came to the surface. When they got there, they saw that Larry Reynolds' dive was already over. Half a minute later, Peter Burr came up to the surface with almost no air left in his tank. Glenn Millot quickly put on a spare tank and went back into the water, knowing that the other divers would be in the same situation. He went down until he was 69 meters from the edge of the cliff. At the edge, he found Stephen Millot's flashlight and camera. There was a lot of silt in the water, and it was almost impossible to see anything. After decompressing, Glenn Millot had no choice but to go back to the surface. When he got to the surface, there was already an ambulance there. Peter Burr went back to the cave for one last look, but he didn't see anyone there. At that point, the group knew they were not looking for people who were still alive, but for dead bodies. When the planned dive was over and the divers turned around to go back to the surface, they saw Christine Millot and Gordon Roberts trying to get back to the rock pile quickly. But instead of going back up the slope they had come down, they swam straight up. They may have done this because they thought they would soon run out of air. The 2 divers swam straight up into a ceiling dome with no way out. Reynolds said he saw their torches searching desperately for a way out before Roberts told him they were lost. Reynolds said that Christine Millot and Gordon Roberts looked scared. No one saw the 2 again after this. The 2 people couldn't find a way out because they probably had nitrogen narcosis and were surrounded by silt, which made it hard for them to see. They lost their breath and drowned. Later, their bodies were found together under the ceiling dome, which they had not been able to get out of. One of the divers who made it out alive said they observed a member of their group diving hard down into the cave a little further down, and about the same time. This was John Bockerman, who probably had severe nitrogen narcosis and didn't know he was swimming to his death. His body was found about 20 feet away from the last place anyone saw him. It was the deepest of the 4 bodies found. Stephen Millot, the 4th person who died, might have been seen lost under the cave ceiling just before the other divers came to the surface. Despite the fact that his flashlight and camera were discovered at the bottom of the boulder pile, his body was only 50 feet down beneath an overhang. We don't know as much about Stephen's last moments as we do about the other victims. He was wearing a buoyancy vest, and because he was discovered under an overhang, he was most likely buoyant when he died. Police arrived at the sinkhole on the morning of January 23, 1974, and plunged to a depth of 50 feet, where they discovered a body floating under a ledge against the slanted cavern roof. The body was promptly pulled out, and police divers searched to a depth of 180 feet, but found nothing else. Initially, the body could only be identified by the equipment it was wearing, and official identification required dental records. The body was found to be Stephen Millott's. The divers suffered from narcosis on both days of diving, but their improved equipment and procedures ensured that the operation went smoothly, and John H. Bockerman's body was recovered from the cave on the 9th of April 1974, 11 months and 11 days after the accident. So that was all we know about the Mount Gambier disaster. And if you liked today's video, then do check out more videos like this on our channel. Also, do subscribe to our channel and hit the like button for more updates.